Hello, my fellow agent. You have accessed Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal events, unsolved mysteries, and deep cultural analysis. You are now in the company of outcasts. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, coming to you from the Jungle Villa outpost deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files, episode 100, The Montauk Project. Time travel, mind control, and monsters. Did I mention this is episode 100? Woohoo! Sweet. Sweet. At the far end of Long Island stands a relic from another era. Concrete bunkers and tunnels behind fences chained shut decades ago. The skeletal shape of a giant, rusted radar tower rising above the pines. The bones of some long obsolete machine. Locals call it Camp Hero, a decommissioned military installation that once guarded the eastern seaboard during the Second World War. But at night, when the surf is black and the tower looms against the sky, the place feels less like a ruin and more like a radio tuned to a forgotten frequency. Something about it is still listening. Something about it still waits. Camp Hero is at the heart of a legend that refuses to fade. It's the stage for one of the strangest stories to come out of the Cold War. According to the people who claim they were part of it, what happened beneath the old radar tower was not routine military work, but a secret science program so extreme that even the rumors still disturb us. Time manipulation, psychic warfare, abduction, and monsters. Today this is known as the Montauk Project, which allegedly began in the late 1960s and extended deep into the 70s and even the early 80s. Its roots, according to researchers and whistleblowers, trace directly back to the United States government programs that experimented with mind control, behavior modification, and psychic enhancement. These programs were the successors to the Philadelphia experiment, the notorious wartime project that allegedly attempted to render a naval ship invisible and accidentally tore open a rift in space-time. Multiple intelligence branches appear throughout the testimonies and the documents tied to this story. The Air Force, the Office of Naval Research, CIA psychological operations, and a rotating cast of private contractors said to have provided equipment, funding, and security. The primary goal of the project, as claimed by its participants, was to weaponize the human mind. This included attempts to induce telepathy, to leverage remote viewing, and to create artificially enhanced intuition. Some say the project ended in 1983, but others claim it never stopped. Together, we will explore what we know and what some shadowy whistleblowers tell us right now on Renegade Files, episode 100, The Montauk Project. Time travel, mind control, and monsters. The Montauk Project. The Montauk Project. The Montauk Project. Now, before we begin, I'd like to ask you a small favor. For some reason, Instagram has stopped serving any and all of my posts everywhere. There are far more controversial Instagram pages than mine that seem to blow up. None of my posts ever show up on any of the hashtags listed on them, even on obscure ones or ones that I make up just to test it. I have no idea why, and the best I can figure is that I've repeated too many of the same hashtags in the past, like hashtag Renegade Files or hashtag UFOs. I'm really not sure. but it looks like my page is shadow banned into oblivion. I used to get up to 90 likes on a post, now I get 1. I might just build a new Instagram page and start over. It would be easy, but kind of annoying. But before I do that, I'd like to ask you to visit the page, follow it if you haven't already, and like and or comment on 1 or 2 of my recent posts, or even a few old ones if you want. Whatever you like. If Instagram is not your thing, don't worry about it. That's cool. I'm talking about scale of thousands. That doesn't mean one person can't help, but it means if one person can't or doesn't use it, it isn't a big deal. But before I make a new page, let's see if we can turn the old one around, okay? So there's a link to the Renegade Files Instagram page in the show notes, or just go to Instagram and search for Renegade Files. Visit the page, follow it if you haven't already, and like or comment on 1 or 2 of my recent posts. Maybe go back and like or comment on an old one. Anything helps. Do what works for you, and I'll give it a month, and then we'll go from there. And thank you for your help. If I do build a new Instagram page, I will let everyone know here in the podcast feed so we can all jump on that and blow it up. Woohoo! So now let's get into episode 100. Part 1. Phoenix 3, the Psychic War Machine. To understand the Montauk Project as it appears in the testimonies, you have to trace its lineage back into the labyrinth of Cold War intelligence programs. The experiments at Camp Hero did not emerge from nowhere. They followed a pattern, one that began with the CIA's early mind control efforts shortly after the Second World War. In 1953, the agency formally launched MK-Ultra, a sprawling network of behavior modification and psychological manipulation studies and programs. This is not conspiracy theory. We have documented facts, and it's been through trials in Congress and the whole 9 yards. These programs used universities, hospitals, prisons, and private contractors to explore the limits of hypnosis, sensory deprivation, trauma, and chemical alteration. If you want a deep dive into that disturbing history, I covered these operations extensively in Renegade Files episode 53, Mind Control and MK-Ultra, and it is worth revisiting that episode to get the full context of what would later unfold at Montauk. But by the early 1960s, the CIA's focus had shifted from chemical control methods toward more exotic possibilities. Psychic potential was being explored at Stanford Research Institute, the Army's Fort Meade Intelligence Division, and pockets of the Office of Naval Intelligence. The government wasn't trying to create superheroes, they were looking for a strategic advantage. They wanted to know if a human mind could be trained to perceive objects across a distance, to influence decisions without contact, or gather intelligence from behind walls. It was during this period that the first seeds of what would become the Phoenix Project took shape. An initiative that aimed to integrate electromagnetics, human consciousness, and intelligence gathering. I always say that word wrong in the beginning. Anyway, intelligence gathering, right? So, this is a sidebar and we're not going to go too far into it, but the Phoenix Project has ties into some really sketchy territory, okay? If you want to go into a really dark, disturbing, deep, gnarly rabbit hole, you can check out Dave McGowan's book, Programmed to Kill, The Politics of Serial Murder, and what he has to say about Project Phoenix or the Phoenix Project. And I don't know, maybe we'll go into that someday. I've thought about doing an episode on it, but I've also thought about not. So you can check it out on your own. Anyway, according to the testimonies of Preston B. Nichols and others who later came forward, Phoenix began around 1969 as an umbrella program that combined declassified radar research with the classified remnants of MK-Ultra sub-projects. Now, these sub-projects included experiments in telepathy, clairvoyance, trauma-induced dissociation, and the manipulation of memory. Now, once again, we got into all that in the MK Ultra episode, the Monarch programming, all that. So anyway, Nichols claimed that when this program expanded into the 1970s, it split into multiple tracks, with Phoenix 2 focusing on weather modification and atmospheric interference, and Phoenix 3 taking over entirely the psychic amplification and the harnessing of human perception as a weapon side of things. It was Phoenix 3 that was eventually moved to Montauk. The date most often cited for this was 1971, when the Air Force relinquished practical operations at Camp Hero, but restricted the base from civilian development, leaving the underground facilities available for classified use. The official agencies that appear in documents from the era include the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of the Navy, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and several private telecommunications and defense contractors. These connections are often circumstantial, but they provide a plausible framework for the layered nature of Montauk. The Cold War produced a tangle of these interconnected research labs, all of them insulated by secrecy. In that environment, a program could move between agencies without ever appearing in a public record. So Nichols first claimed involvement at Montauk in the late 1970s. He described himself as an electrical engineer contracted through a defense communications company. Whether or not his biography is accurate, the technical details he provided about the radar tower and the underground power routing systems are consistent with what we know about the capabilities of the ANFPS-35 complex. So, he said that when he arrived, the program was already underway, but still in its early stages. The goal was to create a machine that could convert human thought into a measurable signal, and then amplify that signal into a controllable field. The centerpiece of this effort was something he called the Montauk Chair. The Montauk Chair was described as a seat equipped with coils, sensors, and biofeedback circuits. So think like mad scientist stuff. Subjects sat in this chair while electromagnetic fields were directed around them. The chair monitored their brainwave patterns and fed those signals into banks of equipment that attempted to reinforce and project the patterns of their thoughts outward. The technology, according to Nichols, drew from earlier psi research conducted under MK Ultra's sub-project 136, which studied telepathic influence and remote perception. By the mid-1970s, the Montauk team believed they could enhance psychic sensitivity through a combination of sensory deprivation, trauma conditioning, and electrical resonance. So this was the foundation of Phoenix 3. Duncan Cameron's involvement in the project is often placed between 1976 and 1983. His role, according to the narrative, was that of a high-potential psychic subject. Individuals like Cameron were supposedly selected due to unusual test results. Also in the mix are hereditary factors or pre-existing involvement in other classified experiments. His testimony, when taken at face value, is dramatic and difficult to corroborate, but he appears repeatedly in the Montauk accounts. He's described as having participated in remote viewing trials, mental projection experiments, and altered state training. His connection to the alleged time portal experiments comes later, in the final years of the program, when the Montauk Chair was said to be operating at its peak amplification levels. So, things are rocking and rolling underground at Montauk. Remote viewing was one of the most stable components of the project. Various branches of the government studied this ability from the early 70s through the 1990s. Some of their findings are public and some of them are declassified. Others are completely redacted. The idea behind remote viewing is that a trained viewer can observe a distant target using only the mind. The viewer receives coordinates or impression-based prompts and then records the images that arises when he's in a trance state, he or she. At Camp Hero, according to Nichols, these sessions were intensified by electromagnetic fields, which were believed to boost the accuracy or the vividness of the mental impressions. Subjects often described seeing shifting shapes, geometric structures, or indistinct landscapes. Whether these images were genuine remote perceptions or products of altered brainwave states remains unknown. The amplification procedures grew more and more complex, and subjects were finally placed into these deep relaxation or dissociation states through sound frequencies and other deprivation methods. So, like the deprivation tank. I think we've talked about that before. It's basically a tank, you float in it. It's got crazy amounts of salt in it, so the salt water lets you float and breathe without trying to tread water or what have you. So you're sort of bobbing at the high surface of this water, and the water that's in there, saline solution as it were, is exactly your body temperature, and the thing is closed up so it's utterly dark and you can't hear anything. So you can't hear anything, see anything, or feel anything, and right off the bat, that's terrifying. And under those certain circumstances, the mind fills in all the gaps and, well, you get the idea. So once these mental states are sufficiently sort of created, then they would take this person out and put them in this Montauk chair, and that would record their patterns and drive currents through this equipment, and then magnify the things they saw under the remote viewing auspices. So that's just sort of a executive summary version of what was going on there. Allegedly, the engineers believed that they were strengthening these psychic signals. Today, neuroscientists would interpret this as overstimulation of the brain's natural rhythms, but regardless of the interpretation, the subjects reported increasingly intense visions, including incredibly vivid scenes from times or places that they couldn't identify. These experiences were described as immersive, like stepping into another environment, rather than they were watching it from afar. It was like they were there. This is where the idea of time projection first appears. If a subject's consciousness could be untethered from the present moment during one of these dissociative states, then researchers believe they might be able to direct it toward a specific point in time, in the past, in the future. Some subjects claim to see historical eras, Lincoln giving a speech, right? Futuristic landscapes or impossible fragments that felt disconnected from any reality that we know. The accounts often blend dreamlike imagery with sharp sensory moments, the way memory does during high-stress experiences. So someone might see something like a scene from the Wild West in a dusty town where all the cowboys are riding giraffes. Right? Crazy stuff. Whether these visions were psychological artifacts or something stranger still is a matter of, I guess, personal interpretation, but the subjects insisted that they experienced these things in real time. The unsettling part of the Montauk narrative involves the recruitment of younger subjects into these experiments, and not just younger, but anyone who was either unwilling or unwitting. Multiple witnesses described groups of runaways and missing teenagers brought to the base between the mid-70s and early 80s. These younger participants were sometimes referred to as the Lost Boys. So we get a little pop culture smokescreen reference there, perhaps. These people's backgrounds, if the stories are true, made them vulnerable. So they were from broken homes or no formal documentation. In some accounts, taken from the streets of New York or from troubled youth centers. Records are incomplete or even non-existent, but these children could disappear into the project with little risk of discovery. At least that's the idea. The alleged purpose of using younger subjects was tied to pliability. So younger minds were considered more adaptable, easier to guide, and easier to get into dissociative or trance states. They don't bring as much baggage, so Testimonies claim these teenagers were used for early stage remote viewing training, while others say they were subjected to more extreme procedures involving emotional stress and identity fragmentation. These details are difficult to verify, but they echo ethically disturbing patterns from earlier MK Ultra operations, which we can verify. So we have this situation of vulnerable populations being selected for experimentation due to their lack of protection. As disturbing as it is, it comes about because of pragmatic reasons. It's obvious. So what stands out in these accounts is the consistency of fear. Subjects described the underground rooms as cold, sterile, devoid of natural light. The corridors allegedly smelled of ozone and metal. The experiments, scientific or psychological, created an environment where the participants felt detached from reality. We hear this over and over again. This continued detachment makes them more susceptible to suggestion. In such conditions, even mundane occurrences could be interpreted as supernatural or extraordinary. The line between perceived and actual phenomena gets blurred, and this contributes to the elaborate narratives that come out later. By the early 1980s, Phoenix 3 had grown far beyond its original scope. The researchers allegedly believed they could manipulate perception on a scale that might influence not just individual subjects, but entire groups of people. This ambition aligns with Cold War strategy when governments were searching for ways to control public opinion, influence enemy morale, and shape global narratives. Sound familiar? The Montauk engineers and psychologists, according to the testimonies, wanted to develop tools that could manipulate belief, emotion, and memory. If a soldier could be made to question his senses, or if an entire population could be directed toward a desired conclusion, the battlefield itself could be redefined. If a troop of soldiers could be made to believe that they fight for the other side, how about that? This thinking wasn't new. This doctrine of psychological warfare had been used since World War II, although maybe not successfully, we're not sure. What set Montauk apart was the blending of psychological strategy with experimental physics. The researchers believed the mind was both a receiver and a transmitter, and that by training it to broadcast at specific frequencies, they could create fields of influence. These ideas were speculative and lacked empirical grounding, but the Cold War climate allowed bold theories to receive funding. With enough secrecy and enough fear-driven motivation and an endless supply of money, almost any idea could be tested. Some accounts describe a moment around 1983 when the experiments reached a breaking point. The combination of dissociation, electromagnetic stimulation, and psychic amplification pushed the subjects beyond their limits. Participants broke down, reported overwhelming visions, sensory overload, a collapse of mental boundaries. It was at this stage, according to Nichols, our whistleblower, that time began to behave unpredictably. The researchers interpreted these anomalies as evidence of success, while the subjects saw them as signs of something spiraling out of control. Madness. If you filter out the implausible details and look at the broader pattern, a clearer picture comes out. The Montauk Project, if it existed even partially, appears to have been a convergence of real-world psychological research, experimental physics, and Cold War paranoia. The testimonies reflect this disorientation and fragmentation that occurs when a person's cognitive boundaries are pushed too far. Trauma, secrecy, and sensory distortion create fertile ground for elaborate beliefs. And those beliefs become the architecture of the Montauk story. The uneasy part is how much of this architecture aligns with documented history. Mind control experiments did occur. Psychic research was absolutely funded, and secret bases operated without oversight. Vulnerable individuals were used as test subjects. We've seen that before. Defense agencies pursued unconventional technologies with minimal restraint. When you consider all of these facts, the Montauk legend no longer feels so detached. Instead, it becomes a distorted reflection of systems that actually existed. The Phoenix 3 narrative continues to unsettle because it sits at the intersection of the known and the unknown. It blends the verified darkness of MK Ultra with the speculative realm of psychic warfare. It offers a portrait of a program that may have tried to weaponize consciousness itself. Even if the more extraordinary claims are exaggerated or symbolic, the core idea is chilling. Someone at some point believed that the human mind could be turned into a weapon of war, and that belief is what shaped the experiments at Montauk. Decades later, the echoes of those experiments still surface in testimonies, in documents, and unexplained anomalies around the area. Whether Phoenix 3 was real or classified operation, or a psychological imprint left by a smaller experiment, its influence lingers. It casts a shadow over the rusted radar tower and the fenced-off bunkers, a reminder that the Cold War produced more secrets than we will ever fully uncover. And within those secrets, the boundary between science and belief narrows until the two become almost indistinguishable. If you enjoy these investigations and want to help keep this independent show alive, consider joining the Renegade Files Agency on Patreon. Your support there directly funds the research, writing, travel, and production hours it takes to bring you episodes like this one, and it helps me keep the show ad-free so far and fiercely independent. Every new agent who joins there unlocks for themselves bonus content and secret dispatches, but more than that, you become part of the small group of listeners who make this work possible. If you believe in digging deeper, questioning the shadows, and keeping curiosity alive, join me at patreon.com/renegadefiles or through the link in the show notes, and thank you to the agents there already, sincerely. Part 2. Time Portals, Monsters, and the Montauk Anomalies. By the time Phoenix 3 reached its operational peak in the late 1970s, the work at Montauk started to shift away from psychic amplification experiments into the deeper territory bridging the mental and physical in ways that even the participating scientists couldn't explain. This was the phase when the research allegedly turned toward manipulating time, and this grew out of a theoretical lineage that had been circulating among military research groups since the early 1950s. Concepts involving electromagnetic field manipulation, resonance harmonics, and nonlinear time behavior were quietly explored by naval researchers, partly inspired by breakthroughs in radar, radio frequency propagation, and the early investigations into the unified field theories. It's within this context we get the stories of the Philadelphia experiment. In 1943, the Navy did conduct classified research into electromagnetic camouflage, attempting to distort radar signatures of ships using large fluctuating magnetic fields. This much is documented. The extraordinary claims about the USS Eldridge disappearing are a little shadier, but the experiment itself was real enough that the military shut down similar projects shortly after due to safety concerns. For the Montauk researchers, this earlier work supposedly provided the missing foundation. They viewed the Philadelphia experiment as a first attempt, an uncontrolled event that hinted at the potential for manipulating space-time. Investigators who later examined the Montauk claims pointed out that several individuals involved with post-war electromagnetic research did have ties to the Long Island laboratories, including Brookhaven National Laboratory and the nearby Naval Weapons Industrial Reserve Plant in Claverton. These facilities were not formally a part of Montauk, but their proximity and shared personal rotations created an environment where advanced theories could easily migrate between the departments. In the world of Cold War research, ideas often traveled further than the scientists who conceived them. The time distortion experiments at Montauk allegedly began with attempts to project a subject's consciousness to a distant point on a timeline. The goal was not physical time travel, but cognitive displacement. Subjects placed in the Montauk chair reported vivid hallucinations that felt more like immersive experiences than dreams. Some described scenes from historical periods. Others saw futuristic or symbolic imagery. Researchers interpreted these perceptions as temporal fragments, the mind wandering through time while the body remained anchored in the chair. Whether these experiments were induced hallucinations, memories blended with imagination, or something stranger can't really be determined today, but the consistency of the reports has been one of the details that keeps the Montauk story alive. Around 1980, according to the testimonies, the researchers made a significant adjustment. Instead of just amplifying the subject's brainwave patterns, they began tuning the surrounding electromagnetic environment to resonate with those patterns. This created a feedback loop that seemed to intensify the visions, as if they needed it. Nichols described it as a point where the experiments shifted from internal perception to external effect. Participants claimed that they could see shapes forming in the air, faint distortions that resembled heat waves or ripples in glass. These moments often preceded what subjects referred to as the opening of a time tunnel. Descriptions of these time tunnels vary, but they all contain notable similarities. People said it appeared as a darkened, swirling space, like a corridor carved from fog. Others say it looked like a long tube lit by dim, shifting colors, as if illuminated by an invisible source. A few described the tunnel as a simple oval-shaped opening along a wall. In each case, the subjects believed the tunnel led somewhere beyond our physical reality. They felt pulled toward it, as if gravity itself had shifted. The sensation was often accompanied by nausea, vertigo, or a powerful sense of detachment from the present moment. Researchers who studied the Montauk claims decades later pointed out that strong electromagnetic fields can produce sensations of floating, falling, and spatial distortion. Experiments at Laurentian University in the 1990s showed that electromagnetic stimulation of the temporal lobes could produce visions of tunnels, entities, or movement outside the body. These scientific findings don't confirm the existence of a time portal, but they do show that the human brain can experience such phenomena when exposed to certain frequencies. This creates a fascinating intersection between psychology, physiology, and the claims made by the people who said they were at Montauk. The most startling part of the time tunnel narrative involves the claims of physical objects passing through it. Nichols stated that researchers conducted small-scale experiments where items were placed near the tunnel's opening, and later recovered in different sections of the underground complex with time markers indicating temporal drift. This starts to get into some Madman Markham territory, right? Now, these details might be impossible to verify, but they reflect real military interest in non-conventional transport technologies. During the 70s, DARPA funded multiple studies into spatial anomaly detection, exotic materials research, and hypothetical rapid relocation methods. These programs were grounded in conventional science, but their goals mirrored some of the ideas attributed to the Montauk Project. Then we get into one of the most amazing elements of the whole story, the Montauk Beast. This ties directly into the final years of the project. In the accounts, a catastrophic event occurred in August of 1983. The Montauk chair, with Duncan Cameron as the psychic subject, entered a runaway feedback loop. Cameron allegedly conjured an image of a monstrous creature during a moment of emotional overload, and the amplification systems made that image appear physically within the underground chamber. Witnesses described it as large, violent, and unstable, rampaging through the facility before vanishing when the power systems were destroyed. They said it appeared to waver. They said it appeared confused and hungry. And what does that remind us of? The Miami Mall incident. Very similar descriptions. This event is the most difficult part of the Montauk narrative to interpret literally. Yet, the symbolic meaning is clear. If the Montauk chair produced intense hallucinations, is it possible that an entire room of stressed subjects could experience the same terrifying imagery, a shared hallucination? That would almost be as remarkable as a real monster, but not quite. In psychology, shared hallucinations can occur during traumatic events or under extreme sensory manipulation. And it isn't exactly that psychologists have proved it, it's more that psychologists use it to explain the unexplainable. Spitting facts, right? Now, this sort of, if there is such a thing, shared hallucination, doesn't require any supernatural intervention. It's just a mind thing. The Beast story may represent the collective mental breakdown of a team that had pushed human cognition way beyond its limits. But we just can't know for sure. The testimonies say absolutely not. But then, some of the testimonies describe the thing as being different sizes. It's weird. Popular culture cemented this idea decades later when Stranger Things debuted, and its original concept title was Montauk, and it was set specifically at Camp Hero and involved a telepathic child whose powers open a portal to another realm. The Demogorgon in that series bears a conceptual resemblance to the Montauk Beast. The shape, the behavior, the psychic connection to the protagonist, all of this mirrors what those whistleblowers say happened at Montauk. Real testimony. It's no secret that these Montauk stories of the Beast influenced the creators of Stranger Things. They've said as much. Witnesses also described weapons research linked to temporal distortion. Some accounts mention narrow field generators that created sudden disorientation in test subjects, similar to what modern crowd control technologies attempt using directed energy. If that sounds like a conspiracy theory, let me just give you a little quote from my research. Modern crowd control technologies using directed energy include systems like the active denial system, which employs high-frequency millimeter waves to create a painful heating sensation on the skin without causing permanent harm. These technologies aim to disperse crowds or deter individuals by causing discomfort, and that comes from the U.S. Government Accountability Office and PHR.org, which is Health Impacts of Crowd Control Weapons from Physicians for Human Rights. So others described these frequency-based devices that interfered with perception as making targets lose their sense of time or surroundings. Now, none of these claims are documented, but similar research did take place during the Cold War. The Defense Intelligence Agency explored the use of microwave fields to induce confusion and disrupt brainwave coherence. The Army researched acoustic systems capable of overwhelming a person's balance and internal rhythm. These were classified as non-lethal weapons programs, and they show that the concept behind Montauk's alleged devices was absolutely in step with the era's technological ambitions. Investigators who have visited the site of Montauk in recent years often report unusual electromagnetic readings in specific locations of the abandoned base. Hallways that should be inert produce spikes on measuring devices. Certain rooms exhibit faint electrical hums even though the power is disconnected. These findings indicate that the underground facility may still contain hidden wiring, sealed equipment, or unrecorded structural features. Old military sites frequently produce anomalies due to forgotten conduits or residual magnetic fields in reinforced concrete. In Montauk, however, these readings take on a different significance because of the legends attached to the location. Whether the anomalies associated with Montauk are literal experiments in temporal manipulation or metaphors for psychological trauma, the resulting testimonies reveal profound effects on the participants. Many described feeling as though time lost its meaning. Some claimed days passed in minutes or minutes stretched into hours. A few said they experienced multiple versions of the same event. These symptoms align with what psychologists describe in subjects exposed to extreme sensory manipulation, dissociation, or trauma, and that would make sense. Memory fragmentation is common. The sense of sequence breaks down. The mind attempts to assemble meaning from a chaotic set of impressions, and the resulting narrative feels surreal. At its core, the story of Montauk's time portals and anomalies functions on two levels. Literally, it suggests that the government attempted to experiment with the structure of time, using human consciousness as the entry point. Symbolically, it reflects the experience of the people who underwent these extreme psychological experiments inside a secretive environment. In either case, the effects were lasting. Something inside the Montauk Project altered the perceptions of those who participated. Whether that something was a temporal distortion, a technologically induced vision, or a powerful psychological imprint remains one of the enduring mysteries of the entire Montauk legend. Standing beneath the old radar tower, the world feels strangely still. The ocean wind pushes through the trees, and the rusted lattice of metal hums faintly, as if echoing the memories of something that once operated there. For decades, the story has persisted because no official explanation has ever come forward to fill the void. The Montauk Project sits in that uncomfortable space where history, speculation, and personal testimony all come together. In that collision, time itself feels distorted, as though the past is closer than it should be because we've never gotten answers for it. And the future is already entangled in whatever happened there. Part 3. The Pop Culture Smokescreen and the Project That Never Ended. By the time the Montauk Project began drifting into public awareness in the early 1990s, something unusual happened to the story. Instead of being investigated like a potential historical scandal, it was absorbed into the entertainment machine. The legend, according to many researchers, did not simply become popular, it was repurposed, rewritten, and folded into television shows, novels, comics, and movies. This transformation shapes how the public interacts with the story today. The mythology around Montauk is now so interwoven with fictionalized versions of itself that serious investigation becomes difficult. Type the word Montauk into any search engine, and you'll be flooded with references to Stranger Things, science fiction fan theories, and entertainment commentary. The real claims, the real testimonies, and the whistleblower narratives are buried beneath a bright, stylized pop culture avalanche. This is more than an inconvenience for researchers. It becomes a form of censorship, not by deletion, but by drowning. When a subject becomes so popularly fictionalized, it is no longer seen as credible. The public stops asking questions. They assume the topic originated with the TV show or the movie because the fictional version is the only one they ever encounter. Researchers who have tried to examine the Cold War origins of Phoenix 3 often complain that serious sources have been pushed so far down the algorithmic ladder that they might as well not exist. If you try to learn about the Montauk Project or Camp Hero, you will first learn about Stranger Things. You will learn about their production team, their filming locations, and then you'll see fan art, Halloween costumes, and character analysis. Rotten Tomatoes. The actual military history of the Montauk Project and Montauk Point becomes invisible behind a cloud of entertainment-focused search results. This kind of cultural saturation is very effective. It replaces a disturbing possibility with a comforting narrative. Instead of confronting an idea that the government may have violated ethical boundaries or pushed human subjects beyond the limits of cognition, the public gets a digestible story about kids on bikes fighting monsters. It's exciting. It's nostalgic because it happened in the 80s. It's emotional and dramatic. But it also reshapes how people think about the origins of something real. The fictional story overwrites the historical one. This is how a smokescreen works, not by informing, but by distracting. Not by hiding the truth, but by burying it under a mountain of noise. The technique has been used before. During the early years of UFO secrecy, government agencies leaned heavily on Hollywood to shape public perception. Flying saucers were portrayed as outlandish, comedic, or wildly unrealistic. The real sightings, the credible witnesses, and the serious research overshadowed by the campy images. When the public thinks a topic belongs in the realm of fantasy, authorities no longer need to suppress it. Dismissal becomes automatic. The audience does that work. The Montauk Project fits perfectly into this pattern. Once Stranger Things became a cultural landmark, the legend was effectively categorized as fiction. Even though the show acknowledges Montauk as its original inspiration, the association had the opposite effect of what researchers hoped. Instead of leading the audience back to the real claims, the show created an entertaining decoy. And this is nothing against the show. I like the show, particularly the first season. Most people stopped at this fictional version. And the small percentage who tried to go deeper ran into the problem of search engine saturation, where surface-level entertainment coverage pushes real-world research into the digital margins. This creates an interesting dilemma. If a government wanted to bury a sensitive topic in plain sight, one of the easiest ways would be to commission, encourage, or simply allow a fictional retelling of the subject, and then that dominates the cultural space. The intelligence playbook has entries for misdirection through art, influence through narrative, and obscuring facts by wrapping them in allegory. It's not really necessary to ban the truth if you can just make people associate it with a TV show instead of an investigation. The entertainment industry may not participate knowingly. In most cases, creators are simply looking for compelling material. But the effect is the same. Montauk transformed from a potentially explosive story about clandestine psychological experiments into a piece of pop mythology starring Winona Ryder and Millie Bobby Brown. The darker claims become indistinguishable from scripted fiction. Researchers who try to discuss the missing children allegations or the psychological conditioning programs often find their work marginalized because the public has been trained to associate Montauk with a supernatural thriller. This is done on purpose. If you subscribe to the idea that the deep state manipulates through media, then you can see their handprints all over it. Another layer of the smokescreen involves humor. Once a topic becomes a meme, a punchline, or an internet trend, it becomes insulated from scrutiny. If the majority of people treat a subject as absurd, investigators risk ridicule simply for taking it seriously. This is a powerful social control mechanism. The ridicule creates self-policing. Those who might pursue the topic step back to avoid being lumped in with fringe theorists. Not me, but people do. In that case, the disinformation has done its job. While the pop culture machine was sanitizing the Montauk narrative, the story itself continued to evolve. Some of the later testimonies claim that the project did not end in 1983, despite the shutdown described by Preston Nichols. Instead, they say the program was relocated. We see this in MK Ultra. They just keep changing the name. According to these accounts, the Montauk base became compromised, the experiments too unstable, and the political climate grew unfavorable for psychic research. As a result, the core team supposedly dispersed into other underground sites. Some point to facilities in Utah, others in Colorado or Virginia, or remote islands used by private defense contractors. These claims are impossible to confirm, but they match a historical trend. During periods of public scrutiny, classified programs often shift location and structure and resurface later under new names. One detail that appears in multiple accounts is that Phoenix 3 was not abandoned. It was absorbed. Some witnesses claim that the research transitioned into new programs that focused on artificial intelligence, identity simulation, and cognitive modeling. These modern equivalents take the psychological manipulation framework of MK Ultra and apply it through digital systems rather than physical laboratories. Instead of isolating a subject in a chair, the new methods isolate attention through algorithmic pathways. The environment becomes the experiment. This is where simulation theory enters the Montauk narrative. Some researchers argue that the later stages of Phoenix 3 were not about time travel, but about altering the subject's perception of time and memory. If the mind could be trained to perceive reality differently, it could be conditioned to operate inside an artificial framework. This leans toward the Mandela effect. We will get to that. It just bothers me so much because I have a good memory. But this idea it sort of mirrors modern simulation theory because consciousness is seen as flexible and programmable. In this interpretation, the time tunnels at Montauk aren't literal gateways, they're just cognitive constructs, and the modern communication tools are the simulations. The concept of memory manipulation also fits inside this landscape. Several testimonies describe procedures designed to erase, implant, or scramble, otherwise obliterate memories or alter memories. Trauma-based conditioning was reportedly used to create dissociation, a state where memories fragment and then recombine. Project Monarch stuff, right? The goal was to produce subjects whose recollection could be controlled or replaced. Modern neuroscience acknowledges that memory is malleable. Under the right conditions, memory can be altered or fabricated. If the Montauk researchers pursued this idea, the results could have been profound. This brings us to the question of why Montauk refuses to disappear. Many Cold War legends fade. Intelligence scandals eventually lose steam. Yet Montauk persists, partly because it all sits at the crossroads of several powerful themes. It taps into the fear of government overreach, the fear and fascination with psychic ability. It looks into the possibility that time and memory aren't fixed. It pursues the idea that reality itself might be manipulated, but from behind the scenes. These themes remain culturally relevant. They resonate with our modern anxieties about digital surveillance, algorithmic influence, and the erosion of shared truth. Scary proposition. Montauk also survives because parts of the story feel strangely familiar. We live in an era where information is shaped, curated, and optimized by unseen systems. We communicate using platforms that learn our behavior and anticipate our thoughts. We've talked about this recently. Breakthroughs in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and cognitive mapping move faster than public understanding. Never before has that been more true. In this environment, the Montauk legend feels less like a relic of the 70s and more like a metaphor for right now. The machinery might look different, but the ambition to shape the human mind persists. Gone are the electromagnetics and underground labs, but in our face are smartphones, neural networks, personalized data. When people revisit the Montauk story now, they often find themselves caught between disbelief and recognition. The details are outlandish, yet the themes feel possible. The technology sounds impossible, yet modern equivalents exist. The timeline seems fantastical, but the geopolitical pressures of the Cold War created an environment where almost anything could be attempted behind closed doors. Is it that much different than today? It is this tension that gives the Montauk Project its cultural gravity, its staying power. This reflects the fear that reality can be edited, that truth can be altered, and that memory can be shaped without consent. Ultimately, Montauk refuses to vanish because it embodies a deeper unease about the world that we live in now. Whether that project was real, exaggerated, or symbolic, it captured something timeless. The fear that unseen forces manipulate the structure of our experiences. The suspicion that entertainment can be used to obscure a difficult truth. The sense that certain topics are intentionally blurred until the public no longer knows what to believe. Montauk lives in that blur. It thrives in uncertainty, and it continues to haunt the cultural landscape because it speaks to a question that no amount of pop culture smokescreen can extinguish. And that is, if reality can be shaped, who is shaping it? And to what end? The possibility that the world behind the world is not what it seems, and that the signals from the past are still moving through our modern day static, waiting for the moment that someone tunes in. That possibility is what keeps us up at night. It's what makes us worry about who's in charge and what their end game is. It's what makes us turn off the noise and look around outside and decide for ourselves what's real. My summary. As we reach the end of this investigation, the Montauk Project stands before us as a strange intersection of secrecy, psychology, and cultural memory. The story pulls together threads from Cold War paranoia, classical research, military experimentation, and the limits of human perception. Whether any part of Phoenix 3 happened as described, or whether these claims emerged from trauma blended with myth, the legend carries a weight that refuses to fade. Something about it feels unfinished. Like an echo that continues long after the source goes silent. Throughout this episode, we followed the narrative from its origins in the fallout of MKUltra and the early psychic programs through the claims of the Montauk Chair, time tunnels, runaway experiments, all the way to the cultural distortions that define this legend today. Along the way, we encountered individuals whose testimonies point toward experiences that shaped them deeply. These patterns mirror the historical record of Cold War research more closely than most people realize. Montauk remains compelling because of what surrounds it. The Cold War created a shadow landscape of classified projects. Intelligence agencies ran covert operations without oversight. Scientists pursued experimental technologies under the protection of secrecy. Literal underground facilities, front companies, and unmarked budgets were common. Are they not now? When you place Montauk into that historical environment, it stops feeling like an anomaly. It becomes part of a broader tapestry of clandestine research where the boundary between science and ambition dissolved. Then the pop culture wave arrived. Stranger Things, novels, movies, all of that reshaped the legend into entertainment. Blurred the distinction between documented history and fictional embellishment. The resulting smokescreen doesn't erase the original claims, it just buries them under layers of spectacle. The truth harder to locate. Yet, one of the strangest aspects of Montauk is how closely it aligns with the modern world. The idea of manipulating perception is no longer confined to underground labs. It's woven into digital platforms that shape attention, memory, and belief. Our collective conversations. Time distortion, once presented as a fringe phenomenon, now echoes through the way we experience information. Days blur, events repeat. Old photos show up as memories, and the timeline of public consciousness shifts faster than we can track it. Memory alteration has become a routine part of the information economy. The idea that reality can be shaped from behind the scenes no longer feels so speculative. It feels familiar. This is why Montauk refuses to vanish. The legend expresses a deeper anxiety that technology, secrecy, and influence have merged into something we cannot fully see. The story lingers because it captures a fear that still applies. It suggests that the world behind all of this information may not match the surface that we trust. So as the wind moves through the pines around that rusted radar tower, and the Atlantic tide pushes against the cliffs, Montauk remains a place where unanswered questions gather. It's a landmark of suspicion, memory, and myth. And whatever happened there, real or imagined, continues to broadcast its signal into the present, waiting for the next person to tune in. Thank you so much for investigating the Montauk Project with me. If you enjoy the shows I make for you here, you can help me keep this independent podcast alive by joining the Renegade Files Agency on Patreon. Your support there directly funds the research, writing, and production hours it takes to bring you episodes like this one. Every new agent gets bonus content and secret dispatches, but more than that, you become part of the small group of listeners who make this work possible. If you believe in digging deeper, in questioning the official narrative, in keeping curiosity alive, then join me at patreon.com/renegadefiles or through the link in the show notes and become an agent today. And thank you so much. If you're an RFA agent there already, you make this show possible. Subscribe or follow this show right now, wherever you're listening, so together we can meet here next Wednesday and explore the crazy worlds where logic calls out the official narratives. And I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Until next week, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Thank you so much for coming along with me for 100 episodes. Wow, what a trip. Now, I am just getting started. Are you ready to rock? Let's go. Stay wild, neon child.